Hello, I'm Mike Buchanan, leader of the political party Justice for Men and Boys and the Women Who Love Them. I'm joined today by Rick Bradford, aka William Collins, well-known blogger on gender issues at the Illustrated Empathy Gap and author of the book, The Empathy Gap, Male Disadvantages and the Mechanisms of Their Neglect. Our interviewee today, and a guest of honour, is Robin Aitken, a BBC reporter for 25 years, ending up on the Today programme under editor Rod Little. His experience at the BBC turned him into one of the corporation's best informed critics. Since leaving the BBC, he has published a series of books about the corporation. The first in 2007 was, Can We Trust the BBC? A rhetorical question if ever there was one, I think. And the most recent in 2020, The Noble Liar. Extremely good book, extremely good book. It explains how and why the BBC distorts the news to promote a liberal agenda. He now works as a freelance and writes regularly for the Daily Telegraph and other newspapers and magazines. In 2016, Robin was awarded an MBE for his part in setting up the Oxford Food Bank, a food recovery charity. He is married with 2 daughters and lives in Oxford. Robin, a very warm welcome.
Thank you very much indeed, Mike. Thank you.
Wonderful to have you here. Robin, when did you start to realise that the BBC was biased?
Well, pretty soon after I arrived at the corporation, really. I mean, I joined the BBC as a young journalist and was very proud to do so because I had been brought up on the BBC, and we're talking now about the 1970s, the late 1970s when I joined the BBC, in local radio initially. And like a lot of others, I think like the majority of British people at that time, I thought the BBC was completely trustworthy and completely honest and fair-minded. And as I went through my career, it became clear to me that actually the BBC has a very distinct worldview of its own, which excludes and discriminates against viewpoints other than those which it holds. So it has a core set of values, and those values actually were not my values. So I disagreed with the BBC's view of many of the big issues facing us. And by the time I joined the Today programme, which was in the mid-1990s, I had formed a view that the BBC just wasn't a fair organisation, and that for all its proclamation of being impartial and fair-minded and even-handed and all the rest of it, it just isn't. And I think that is a self-serving fiction on the part of the BBC, and in so many ways, on so many issues, the BBC takes a quite partisan view of the debate. And because of its enormous visibility, its ubiquity in British society, it has an enormously powerful voice, which I think distorts the national debate.
Rick?
Yeah, in your book, The Noble Liar, you do stress that the key role that broadcast media plays in forming, even manipulating public opinion, and the BBC's chief amongst them. But now we're faced with the internet as well. So do you think the internet is forming a suitable counter to that broadcast media narrative, or do you think the broadcast media is still very much holding sway?
Well, I think that there's no doubt that when the internet opened up, and it allowed for an awful lot of voices and opinions which hitherto had been in many ways suppressed, it allowed those to come to the fore. So in a way, the advent of social media and blogs and YouTube and all the rest of it has opened up the the debate to a certain extent. But I don't think that the BBC and the mainstream media have been dethroned. I mean, if you look at British society, I would say that the BBC still has the dominant position in the country's mainstream media, and there are still millions, tens of millions of us who regard the BBC as an important and influential and trustworthy guide to the public debate. And so, although I think in the last 10 years or so, the questions about the BBC have to some extent eroded its authority. There are more, you hear more voices now questioning the BBC's authenticity and its fair-mindedness. You know, that is much more current as a question of debate, but the BBC still enjoys this tremendous privilege, which is the license fee, which guarantees it a place absolutely central to the UK's mainstream media. And if I just say this about the license fee, it's not often, it's not always understood, I should say, that just what a privilege the license fee is, because the license fee guarantees the BBC an income. And so unlike all the rest of the broadcasters, all the rest of the media, it doesn't have to fight for its income. It has its income delivered to it on a plate. And that allows it to, well, it means certain things flow from that. One of the consequences is that it can plan for the long term, the BBC, secure in the knowledge that it's going to be receiving X billion pounds next year. Now, it has to be said also, the BBC's income is on a declining trend just at the moment, because a lot of people are refusing to pay their license fee, and because of the fragmentation of the market, because of internet access, the BBC isn't quite as secure in its income as once it was. But it still is a mighty institution with a lot of clout. And I have been arguing now for 20 years for it to be reformed, because I think that it has a distorting impact on national debate.
And do you think phenomena like GB News and the myriad of emerging sort of podcasts on the internet that sometimes get huge audiences, do you think that's going to oblige the BBC to change, or do they not feel any such pressure simply because that their income is secured?
I don't think that they are, they're not invulnerable. So I know for a fact, because I have contacts in the BBC still, who I talk to quite regularly. And I know that there are senior people in the BBC who are worried about the current position. Now, because they know that there is a rising degree of hostility towards the BBC. I think, you know, this came into focus over the Brexit argument, because it was so very clear during that agonizing debate that we had in the country for what, 3 or 4 years, you know, leading up to the referendum and then post-referendum. It was so clear during that time that the BBC was partial in that debate and was very much a Remainer by instinct. And that brought it into people's minds that the BBC wasn't playing fair. Now, you mentioned GB News. GB News, I wish it well. I've watched it recently a bit. I think it's getting better. I think it's serving a useful purpose. Will it ever challenge the BBC? Well, it will never get the audiences the BBC gets. But the very fact that you have a new player like that in the market, which is finding an audience, albeit a small audience at the moment, and giving a platform to a different set of views does put pressure on the BBC, because one of the things about the BBC is that the people who work in it on the news and current affairs side are probably the most obsessive consumers themselves of news and current affairs. And so when something new like GB News arrives, people will be watching it. And as I say, unfortunately, GB News got off, as you know, Rick, it got off to a very poor start, really. It had a very dodgy start, lots of technical problems, etc. And it's finding its feet now. And some of the stuff I've watched on it has been very good, actually. But it's a long way from being what you might call a full-blooded competitor to the BBC.
It is very clear that we're living in a society which is very divided now. I don't know how the numbers divide up, but there's clearly a very severe chasm between two schools of thought. And I wonder, is this because it's become harder to discover where the truth lies these days, or is it actually that we've just realized that perhaps it was always a lot harder to discover where the truth lies?
Well, truth, as jesting Pilate said. What is it? You see, I think, and this stems from my own personal belief system, I'm a Catholic, and a conventional Catholic. So I was raised a Catholic, and I am a Catholic. I'm a Christian by conviction. And so I believe that there is a truth, which is an objective truth. And I believe that from that objective truth, which I hold, certain things follow. So I think that the question of right and wrong is easily divined if one believes in the Christian message. Now, we have moved in this country a long way from that. So starting in it's always been there. There have always been people who've rejected the idea of God. There have always been atheists and agnostics. But it wasn't until the post-war period that if you like, those sorts of people reached critical mass, those sorts of ideas reached critical mass. What we now live in is a society where there is no such thing as objective truth. Your truth and my truth, are reckoned to be of equal worth. What that means is that if you take a moral issue, any moral issue you care to name, abortion, divorce, whatever, the Christian view is one thing, abortion is a wrong thing, an evil in itself, objectively so. The non-believer says to me, well, your view is of no more worth or weight or value than anybody else's view. We now live in a society where people construct their own morality according to their own preferences. So it's a kind of moral chaos. And so when you say, is it possible to divine what the truth is? I think I don't think that there are, I think for human fulfillment and for the proper functioning of human society, that the rules that Christians abide by are the best rules to run society by. But I'm in a minority, and what you have out there is a lot of competing ideas about what is morally right and what is morally wrong. And as I say, that's a kind of chaos, and divining the truth in that is an impossibility.
I think you've hit the nail on the head there. I mean, it's certainly my opinion that the root cause of our division is a difference of moral outlook. And despite the fact I'm a lapsed Protestant, I also believe that there is an absolute moral law or a natural moral law, and it's moral relativism is a great wickedness as far as I'm concerned. And I think that lies at the heart of a lot of these problems. Mike.
Yes, Robin, could you just sit a little bit further? That's fine. That's perfect. I mean, I'll cut this next few words out, but I'm an atheist of maybe 50 years standing. I was brought up as a Roman Catholic, Catholic boarding schools, very, very happy days. I seem to be about the only boarding school pupil that actually loved his education. But I find myself now sort of ever more of an agnostic. And this is a direction of travel that will end in Rome. And my mother has this expression: once a Catholic, always a Catholic. And
yeah. So a friend of mine at the moment, actually, and this will be cut out too, is Bishop Michael Nazir Ali, the man who's just come across to the Roman Catholics, to Rome. And look, faith is a personal matter, of course. But without a belief in God, of course, there is no objective morality. Because if you say, well, we can all construct our own morality, God does not exist. Once you accept that there is no God, who lays down the rules, right?
Karl Marx, it would seem.
Yeah, well, indeed.
Anyway,
Nietzsche, God is dead is what you're alluding. I think the Buddhists might take issue with you in terms of if there's no God, there's no morality. I think they have a very, very different position there.
I shall edit that bit out.
That discussion though does lead me to one of the questions I wrote, which is
Rick. I'm sorry to interrupt, but I think it's time for me to ask one. I think you've asked the last two. Thank you very much. Robin, to those of us in the men's rights movement, the entirety of the mainstream media is a problem for us. BBC just happens to be at a fairly extreme wing of it, and as you say, very, very influential. Not one mainstream media outlet in the world, to the best of my knowledge, reports anything like the facts about feminism and feminists. What is the BBC's attitude to feminism?
Well, the BBC has internalized feminism to become part of its core values. So, and what I mean by that is that it is now axiomatic that the BBC will always start any reporting on any subject which touches on feminist issues or feminist concerns. It will always start, the starting point will always be that of the mainstream feminist movement. So, and what I mean by that, if I can give it a little illustration, in the past couple of weeks, 10 days ago or so, it was announced by the government that the armed services were going to be made more female friendly, and the army at the moment is in the course of being reduced to its smallest since the wake of the Napoleonic Wars. So it'll be down to about 80,000 people, and it is intended that there will be more females in the army in the future. Now, I've nothing at all against females wanting to go into the army. Fine, if that's what they want to do, and I'm sure they play a valuable role. I also think that it is a naive position to think that females make good fighters, because they don't. And our enemies, and we do have enemies out there potentially, people like, well, it's invidious to name nations, but there are plenty of countries around the world that wish us harm. They are not converting their armies into female-friendly spaces. They are not recruiting more females. Now, my point is that the BBC would never raise this as an issue. When that announcement was made, why wasn't the presenter on the Today programme quizzing the defence minister about the wisdom of increasing the numbers of females in the army? Well, the reason they don't do that is because the BBC will have assumed, and its presenters will certainly have assumed, that increasing the numbers of females in the army is a priori a good thing. But is it? Well, it seems nonsensical to me, actually. But of course, to raise that question in the way that I have just raised it would be seen as antagonistic towards a feminist precept. And that's why it's never done, because the BBC, considers feminism to be an unchallengeable. It is not there to be challenged. It is simply there to, it is mainstream feminism, if you like, is an arbiter of the national debate, and what it says goes. So, that's what I think about that.
Despite the fact that only, I think it's 9% of British women self-identifies feminists, according to the Fawcett Society of all people.
Well, there you are.
Sorry, Rick, is it my turn or yours?
Whichever. I mean, what haven't we? Do we want to tackle a completely different subject? Or
I love the question, your question, Rick, on political Christianity, number 13.
Yeah, that's what I was going to lead into before, after our sort of off the record discussion, because I do note.
Sorry, Rick, if you want to record it, if you can just give a little gap.
I do note a peculiar phenomenon, and I wonder if you've noticed this as well, Robin, that I call it political Christianity. And this is people who have grown very concerned about the excesses of the progressive, woke, hard left, if you want to call it that. And they're seeking a sort of organized resistance. And many of them are finding that resistance in what you might call the traditional church, not the C of E, of course, but those Catholic churches which are still very traditional in their outlook, or even in some cases the Orthodox Church, the Eastern Church. Have you noticed this phenomenon?
Yes, I mean, I think that what you say is true. I think it's becoming clear that that the epicenter of the countercultural in Britain now is Christianity itself. So the Christian churches, or Orthodox conventional Christian belief, stands in opposition to so many of the values which are now central in British society. And so people are drawn to it. Even it's quite interesting. I mean, I have quite a lot to do with various organizations which I speak to and work for occasionally, and these, you might say, are a gathering of organizations which are in favor of free speech, who take a conservative view on social issues, so social conservatives, people like the kind of people you might see on the New Culture Forum, for instance. And mixing with those sorts of groups, what I notice is that there is a new openness on the right to the wisdom of Orthodox Christianity, because, and this is no surprise, the thing about, it seems to me, the thing about Christian morals and Christian teaching as handed down to us is this, that they provide a set of rules for living, and these are tried and tested rules, and they embrace the most intimate aspects of our humanity. So, for instance, the Christian rules about how men and women should live together and raise a family, these are rules which are quite clear-cut, and they are not in any sense harsh or vindictive, because they are grounded in the idea that the male owes a duty of love and respect to the female, and vice versa. And we are constructed as human beings to complement each other, the two sexes, and living together as male and female and raising a family. The Christian message is particularly relevant and directed to that exact location. That is the loci of Christian thought, and where it is its most relevant and germane. And that is why I think that there is this, I agree with you, by the way, Rick, I think there is a sort of resurgence there's a sort of gravitational pull to Orthodox Christianity. And it's exerting its pull on people who are questioning the way society is and have doubts about the wisdom of our current dispensation and the direction we're apparently going in. So I think you're right.
If you take that line, as I think you do, and as I think I do too, one of the major social changes induced largely by feminism over the last half century is the breakdown of the stable nuclear family. And I know you have a concern about marriage issues. So if I was to suggest that the now acceptable nature of children being born outside marriage and the very easy dissolubility of marriage, so that marriage hardly means anything. If I was to suggest that those two phenomena taken together are probably, if they continue, socially and culturally terminal, would you think I was overstating the case?
No, I don't really. I mean, I think it's a disastrous turn of events that we have undermined the idea of stable family lives, and there is so many of our ills, the most obvious ills in society in Britain, can be traced to the breakdown of the stable family unit. There are more than 1 million young children in Britain who don't have a father or don't know their father. The consequence of a lack of a father figure, particularly for young men, is quite disastrous. I mean, I was lucky, and I acknowledge the fact of my luck, that I had a father who was quite strict in a way, but a loving father who was always there. And he was one of that generation who understood his duty as being providing for the family, putting food on the table, supporting his wife, and she did a traditional wifely, motherly role. Now, it has been an explicit ambition of the feminist movement to undermine the so-called nuclear family, which was accused of all sorts of ills. This quite overblown, in quite hysterical view of the wickedness of the patriarchy. Well, my own experience of patriarchy was of having a loving father who looked after his family as best he could. And from that, I learned that the growing to maturity as a male, as a young man, means accepting responsibility for other people. And it means that once you have children of your own, they are your responsibility. And it means that you have to act with self-restraint as regards your own impulses and desires. Look, I'm no saint, far from it. And I know how difficult it is to be a faithful mate and a faithful male. Infidelity is a temptation to nearly all mankind, nearly all men, actually, and women too. Actually, a lot of them are tempted by it as well, obviously. And so part of growing to maturity is being able to say that acknowledging that temptation and resisting it. Because one of the reasons for doing so is because by resisting those temptations and staying with your mate, the mother of your children, what you're doing is fulfilling the obligation of the mature male. You're accepting the responsibility. Irksome, it will be irksome. It'll be a burden. It'll be a right drag a lot of the time. But the point about doing it is because only by doing that can you construct a healthy family life which stays together. You know, child rearing is a decades-long business, and if you abandon children, if you don't stay with your woman and accept the responsibility of the children that she has borne you, then you are not you're not shouldering the proper responsibility, proper to the male. That's my
The problem now that young men are in is that they may be very keen to shoulder exactly that burden, but the problem is, whereas motherhood is something defined biologically, fatherhood is socially defined. And if society, if culture and our legislature don't protect fatherhood, then it becomes undermined. So the problem that young men now face is that they may want to shoulder that burden, but the reality is they've got something like a 50-50 chance a few years down the road of finding that they're yet another client of families need fathers, that they've been kicked out of the house, accused of all sorts of things, alienated from their children, and they become emotionally and financially destroyed by it. And I know not all men in that position are angels, but that's what a lot of young men are now looking at and beginning to think, well, perhaps that's not the best option. So what's the solution?
Well, it's obvious, isn't it, that marriages and relationships break down. Well, we know that, and there are all sorts of reasons for that. The problem, I think, lies in the way that we teach young people about these issues. So we have destigmatized the idea of single motherhood. Once upon a time, when I was a young boy and in my mum's time, you know, the idea that a young woman would have a baby out of wedlock was considered disgraceful. And one of the objectives of feminism has been to rehabilitate the idea of the single mother. So, so you often hear it argued, well, there is no reason to discriminate between the mother, father, children family and the single the single parent family. Both are of equal worth. They aren't, actually. And they're not equal in this sense. They're not equal in the sense of the outcomes they deliver for the children of those relationships. So single parenthood is a predictor for the children involved of bad outcomes in all sorts of different ways. In terms of educational achievement, professional achievement, criminality, even health. All these things are you get less good outcomes in single parent families than you do in families which stick together. Now, the law cannot make an unhappy man and an unhappy woman stay together, nor should it try. I think that's obvious, isn't it? If a relationship has broken down for reasons which are irreparable, nothing can be done by that in law. But what the law can do is to make it plain to young women in particular that it is not the state's obligation to raise children. If you have children, they are the responsibility of the mother and the father. And unfortunately, we've now come to accept the idea that it's perfectly okay for an unmarried woman to have babies, and that the state will step in and help her raise those children. Well, we need to reinstate the idea that stable families are good for everybody. And one of the ways you could do that, for instance, a practical thing you could do, you could make the tax system beneficial to those people who stay in a stable relationship. So you could make the married man's allowance, for instance, a much more generous and realistic thing than it is at the moment, because it's not very generous, or I mean, it's hardly noticeable at the moment. So you could use the tax system, to encourage people to stay together and raise their children in a stable unit. That would be a practical thing to do.
Robin, we've had the Conservative MP, Philip Davis, a wonderful man, speak at 3 of our conferences. We had 3 Conservative MPs lined up to speak at this, to be interviewed and have live Q&As at this conference. All 3 bailed on us without saying why. So the only Conservative politician or ex-politician we still have is the adorable Anne Widdecombe. I'm very pleased to say she was. People are going to love that interview. Is the failure of the Conservative Party to uphold social conservative values is it because they first lost moral authority and were forced to adopt a reluctant, watered down liberalism in a desperate attempt to avoid being the nasty party?
Well, the problem about the Conservative Party is that there are too few Conservatives in it. There are lots of phony Tories who are they're Tory. What is it? How do you be a Conservative? How to be a Conservative? What does it mean to be a Conservative? Well, I would say that social conservatism, that is to take a conservative position on moral and social issues like divorce, like abortion, all these tricky issues, that is central to being a conservative. It's not simply about the economics. For too many Tories, being a Tory simply means that one is in favour of pro-business, pro-profits. That sort of agenda seems to define far too many Conservatives. Anne Widdecombe, bless her heart, is a thinking Tory who understands that conservatism with a small and a big C should have regard to these central moral questions. It's not all about economics. And Anne gets that in. Now, the fact that you had 3 Tory MPs who bailed out on you, I don't find that terribly surprising, because I think it's risky for politicians now to put their head over the parapet on these issues. And it's so easy to vilify and categorize these people as sort of, you know exactly what will happen to someone who steps out of line on one of these issues. They're going to.
Philip Davis always says to me, you know, they see what happens to me, and they think, I don't think I want any of that. Thank you very much.
Yeah. What is Philip Davis says? I've got 20,000 followers on Twitter, and they all hate me.
He's a great man.
Yeah.
Are we up to the final question?
No, we still have probably about 8 minutes, Rick. So if you want to carry on, I've got one about I can ask about Newsnight, but if you want to, whether we get to that or not, I mean.
Well, I think my question to make a good final question. So you go first.
Okay. Robin, in 2014, Kirsty Walk presented a lengthy piece on domestic violence for the BBC programme Newsnight, which failed to mention at all male victims or female perpetrators. I sent a very detailed complaint, including details of more than 50 breaches of the BBC's own editorial guidelines. The complaint was rejected with 0 engagement. I concluded from this what many had concluded before and since, that the BBC is unaccountable. Does this story surprise you, or is it very much par for the course?
Well, sadly, it doesn't surprise me at all, because the BBC's complaints procedure is simply not fit for purpose. I mean, it is a device by which the BBC screens out objections, and they disappear into this black hole and nothing happens. As it happens, I've known Kirsty for many years. In fact, I was, when she was a junior producer up in Scotland, I was a reporter up there, and I knew her then. Now, Kirsty is somebody who I think has a lot of admirable professional skills, but she is also a template for BBC Woman. She is somebody who accepts and has internalized completely the modern feminist doctrines. It would no more. It would. I don't think it would ever. I don't think it would ever suggest itself to her. The something which. Let me rephrase that. Kirsty's starting point on any issue she would be reporting on would be that of a mainstream and in some ways quite militant feminist. It would never occur to her to start a report from a position questioning feminist orthodoxy. And in that, she's absolutely typical of BBC female journalists. The problem about the BBC, I mean, she in a way exemplifies the problem, which is that within the BBC there is an unhealthy lack. There is a very unhealthy lack of internal debate. The whole place is suffused with a groupthink, which means that viewpoints which challenge its orthodoxies just don't get a look in. And so your complaint about female perpetrators of domestic violence is not something which is on the agenda. It just isn't. We know about the Overton window, the idea that there is this space which is rigorously policed, and only those issues inside the space can be talked about. Any issue which is outside the space doesn't get a look in. Well, who draws the boundaries? The BBC itself draws the boundaries. You know, I've often used the phrase that the BBC is the gatekeeper of the national debate. Mm. If the BBC is not debating an issue, it is not an issue, as far as most people are concerned. And this goes, you know, the BBC's influence is such that if the BBC puts it on the agenda, then the politicians have to follow that agenda. So, you know, your MPs who pulled out, I don't blame them, you know, because they, the media is a far more, has a far more potent input into the national debate and people's viewpoints than do politicians. The politicians are, you know, trailing along in the wake of the broadcasters. That's why the BBC needs to be reformed. That's why the BBC really needs a kick in the pants, because, you know, Tim Davie, the new Director General, says that he is going to restore impartiality. I wish him well. It'll be a hell of a job, but it absolutely needs to be done, because if it's not done, views like yours and lobbies like yours are simply screened out of the equation. You know, it's completely unfair. It's completely partisan. It's completely wrong, actually.
I wonder if we could just hold it there, Robin. So we got 3 minutes, Rick.
Okay, so earlier on you mentioned the new Culture Forum. Now, if I remember correctly, you were amongst the first, possibly the very first person that they interviewed on their podcast back in January 2019, I think it was, so nearly 3 years ago.
Yes.
And on that podcast, which I had another view of the other day, you said that change was in the air. That was your view 3 years ago, and you meant that, I think, in a positive way. Were you right then? Is there still change in the air in a positive direction?
Look, I'm an optimistic sort of person, and because I think that the problems in our society are problems to which social liberals have no answers. In fact, the problems in our society have been caused by 50 years of progressive social liberalism. And so the reason I'm optimistic is because every society, you know, there is a fulcrum point in society, and things swing left and they swing right. And we have swung right out to the extreme on one side. And people's ordinary human common sense tells them that something's wrong. And one of the reasons I'm optimistic is this, that when you think back to the Brexit debate, and when you think about the way that the scales were loaded on one side of the equation, you had a mainstream media which was overwhelmingly Remain, and the population was battered year after year after year with propaganda about how marvelous the EU was. And yet, when people were given the opportunity, at long last, to have their say, how did they vote? They rejected all that conventional wisdom which was pouring out of the media, and they went their own way. They used their own heads and their own hearts to make that decision. Now, I think the same is true of these issues that concern your organization. I think that the issue of fairness to men, being fair to men, of resurrecting the idea of a healthy patriarchy, acknowledging the importance of the traditional male role, and acknowledging the importance of helping and teaching young men how to fulfill that role, I think people still understand this. And I think that there are some ideas which are so stupid, only university intellectuals can entertain them. And that is what is ruling the roost at the moment. And that is why we're in such a mess. But I also think, I think that Britain is a great country. And I think our history shows that we are a country which, of all the countries in the world, there are few better places to, there are a few countries which have made a better, more benign mark on the world than Britain. Given the opportunity, the British people will have their last say on this, and it won't be to the liking of the people who currently rule the roost at the BBC and in most other institutions.
And thank you, Robin. And on that uplifting note, of course, there are no other countries that can compare with Britain. I mean, that's a given, really. I expect someone will ask me to edit that out, but I'm not going to. Robin, it's been an absolute delight and very, very interesting. Thank you so much for joining us as a guest of honor. Fascinating interview. And I think we'll have to call it a wrap there.
Excellent. Well, I hope you can get something useful out of that. Thanks a lot, guys.
Oh yes, that'll be. There won't be much cut out of that, Robin.
No,
yeah, that was excellent, and that particularly that last one was a good note on which to end. I think. Yeah, perfect.
Good.
Yeah, okay. Really, really interesting. Thank you, Robin. Really appreciate it.
Pleasure. Yeah, very much appreciated.
Thanks for.
We'll have to meet again so I can ask all my other difficult questions.
Yeah,